we had to become better quickly, and we used smart home and smart building technology to really do that during a very, very difficult time. So your package handling systems, your concierge systems, your phone systems, all of that adds up to make a smart building. When we as companies invest in an asset, we always go back and say, did our underwriting work? Did we underwrite this asset correctly? And I think if you're not, then you're really not doing it the way you should.
Okay, we're here with Susan from Elme Communities. Susan, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. So I'm Susan Gerock. I'm the Chief Information Officer at Elme Communities. We are a publicly traded real estate investment trust. We're based in Bethesda, Maryland. We have communities in the Washington, D.C. area and Atlanta, Georgia area, around 9,400 units.
That's great. And you're doing a session here at RecCon on smart buildings, which I feel was like a huge topic maybe like 4 years ago for us when we were hitting the conference circuit. I felt like it felt like most sessions were about smart technology or smart buildings. So tell us a little bit about where that smart buildings today. I'm consider me more naive, I guess, at this point. So what's changed in the last 4 or 5 years?
I will say, first of all, when we talk about 4 years ago, COVID.
Yeah.
And we certainly saw a huge change in what our residents needed, what our community teams needed. And I feel like someone at the time used a phrase that I have used over and over again, and that is, we pulled the future forward, meaning there was dramatic change in how we approached leasing, in how we approached maintenance, in how we approached amenities for our residents. They couldn't go anywhere. And it really provided a number of opportunities to put tech into place in our communities that we probably would not have gotten there yet, but for the pandemic. And, you look at what happened during that time, and you try to look for those tiny little silver linings, and I think we had to become better quickly, and we used smart home and smart building technology to really do that during a very, very difficult time.
Yeah. I'd heard the same thing about it, pulling it forward. And then after the pandemic, I've witnessed that some companies, some of it's fallen back off. I don't believe it to be permanent, but there were a lot of communities that really rushed to do self-guided tours and those types of things. And in some of those communities, once things went back to normal, if you will, they just were like, I don't know if I still need this, or they didn't find the consumers adopting it as much as they had been, obviously, during the pandemic. Is that some of your experience? And I'm just curious how you see that trending.
That is a trend that I think, what you measure, you manage. And so when you look at when do people really want to tour? When do they have time to tour? And I think it varies from asset type to asset type, location to location. And there are a lot of people, it is easiest for them to tour at 8 o'clock in the evening when they're done with work. And if you can set it up so that they can do that themselves, they can schedule it themselves, they can then interact with a leasing agent on their time, then you've got to win. And I think it's always that balance of understanding the technology aspect and the human aspect, and where does that handoff need to take place. I think today, walking away from that, you're walking away from something that's a game changer.
Yeah. Well, I think we were just talking about this in a prior session, but sometimes people overreact to the current trend or what's not working today, and they're like, okay, so we don't need it anymore. Versus, why is it not working today? So we were talking about self-schedulers, and they were saying that the self-schedulers aren't necessarily always working for all of their assets. And I thought they made a great point that it was, why is it not working? Why is it not working? Versus, hey, it doesn't work. So in their case, like maybe, leads from this type of lead source need a follow-up reminder or something like that to make them show up. So let's address the problem and not just say the whole thing's not worth it. Scheduling is not worth it. Yeah, thank you. All right, one last foundational thing before I pass it to Nicole, because she's all about client experience. Would you define smart building to us? Like, where does a smart building begin and end? Or how's the industry thinking of it today? So that would be helpful.
I would say it's very controversial. Is that the right word? It is very fragmented. And I believe it really varies by asset type. When you think about what is a smart building in a high rise in a city, what is a smart building in student housing? What is a smart building in a garden style apartment in the suburbs? It's all very different. And you have to approach each one as its own ecosystem. And I think when you listen to our panel here at RETCon, you're going to hear a lot of different points of view as to what makes a smart building. In my mind, it is so much more than access control or, community-wide Wi-Fi or smart home technology. It's about everything in your building that is connected to technology. When we talk about the Internet of Things, that's your smart building. So your package handling systems, your concierge systems, your phone systems, all of that adds up to make a smart building.
Yeah, I was a little bit off. I installed a clap on, clap off in our master, and I thought that counted. I guess I.
That is smart home lighting.
Thank you.
So we'll give you credit for that.
Thank you.
Behind the times.
In our primary room. Sorry, yeah, my clap on.
I was
going to
correct you on that.
It actually didn't work very well. Like I was like on the TV commercials, it worked so well back in the '80s, and now like clap on, clap off, it didn't always understand what I was clapping. All right. Well, Nicole, before you got here, Susan, and before we were recording, she was talking a lot about things such as what can you do with the data? Like what can you do with the package, your package handling data or your phone system? I thought that'd be a nice spot for you to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on the metrics. So you had mentioned, what you measure and monitor actually gets done. And so what are some of the things that you're looking at either from a metric standpoint or when you're rolling out a new technology? What does success look like there?
We try to go into any kind of pilot that we are doing with an understanding of what is success. I love your phrasing on that, because I think if you don't, how can you know if what you've done has any meaning or has contributed to resident satisfaction or community team satisfaction or cost savings or revenue enhancement? Like, you don't know unless you've set those baselines going in. And so for us, we always want to understand not only what's the technology doing, what can we learn from it? What can we learn about how our community is operating? How can we learn more about our resident preferences and how to meet those needs better? A great example is, and like most other owner-operators, through development or through acquisition or just through, who did the vendor call at the time, you might have a lot of different package locker type services. But when you're able to standardize on certain services, you can learn a lot about what's going on at your community. How many packages are coming in? How long are they sitting there in the package locker? Where are they coming from? How many are coming from UPS? How many are coming from FedEx? What are the delivery times? And you can even think about, what do we need to do to make this a better experience for everyone involved, to make it a better experience for the resident, for the delivery person, for the person at the community? Is there benefit in having some kind of package delivery rather than saying, oh, this poor resident, works all the time. They don't have time to come and get their package that has, the freezer bags in it or whatever it is. And are there things that you can do to drive staffing, to drive resident satisfaction, that you can just learn from your package locker? To me, that is part of a smart building, is what can you learn about your community?
Super powerful. And how can you connect those dots to ultimately drive and more increase, engaged resident, happier resident? Along that thread, when you're talking about setting up metrics for success early on, whenever you're rolling out a new piece of technology, how do you think about the timeline? Because we know that it's not going to be immediate. We're not going to see either resident satisfaction lift. We're not going to see efficiency on staffing immediately. There's going to be some delay. So how do you, and do you close the loop to then come back to say, okay, it's been 2 years. What has this looked like for us?
I think it's really important. When we as companies invest in an asset, we always go back and say, did our underwriting work? Did we underwrite this asset correctly? And I think if you're not, then you're really not doing it the way you should. I think it's the same way with technology investments. Did what we expected to happen with this investment? Did we get the engagement? Did we get the adoption that we expected from this particular amenity or this particular technology that we have rolled out at the community? Or if it's something that is more, I'm going to go back to my package locker example. If it is something more service-based, did we learn what we hoped we would learn from this technology in addition to providing a service?
Yeah. I don't know if that hit on. I think you wanted to talk more about customer experience. I don't know if I picked up your question.
I thought it was interesting. So I would like to go, I think those are two nice little threads to take, the package handling and then the phone calls, because those are two things you mentioned to me. And we have some data on phone calls. We don't on package handling. For like our home, FedEx, not a good experience. They just drop it at the end of the driveway, and they claim we're in the mountains and like we can't be responsible for going up your driveway. Versus our UPS driver comes and he'll walk it up the steps and drop it right on the door. Guess who I'm giving my Christmas card to? I'm giving my Christmas card to our UPS driver, not to the FedEx driver. I'm like, you're not getting the tip.
Exactly.
Right? But for a building, they're not really interacting for the most part, with the driver. They're engaging with the building staff, right, to either get the package or use the smart locker. So whereas at a residential home, I'm thinking about, man, FedEx is letting me down and UPS is doing a good job. That's a different experience for the building, and you guys have to take that on.
Yes.
Versus, I think some people forget about that responsibility. So maybe, is there any example you have there as far as what action you might take based on some of that data that you may glean to help the customer experience?
I think the big thing for us is understanding, when do packages arrive? How long do they sit there? And where are those opportunities to maybe take someone who isn't as busy during certain hours and have them deliver packages? I mean, who isn't happy to get a package? Like, do you know anybody that isn't happy to get a package?
I'm no longer happy to get junk mail, but if they start sending me junk packages, I don't know.
You might be okay with that. And I think that's the thing. When you think about how to put a smile on someone's face, your UPS example is perfect. If I knock on your door and I'm handing you, your cookies from your mom, you're going to be happy. You're going to be like, oh, this is nice. Yeah. And that, to me, those little things can be a real difference maker. And they also can help you from a staffing standpoint to think about, who do we need to have here? What should they be doing? And during what hours? And I think for us, I think the companies that can solve that question are going to be the most successful companies.
Mm-hmm. So on the call side of things, when we send leads, we track the calls to see what's happening. And what we were experiencing, this is maybe 6 years ago, we would show up to a client call and be like, man, we sent you 100 phone calls. Wasn't that amazing? And then the client would be like, I didn't get 100 leads from you. What are you talking about? And then what we learned as we tracked the data down is that our system, meaning the providers we were using for call tracking, were simply saying, hey, a call connected to the building, therefore it's a lead. When in reality, the IVR, the robot, picked it up and was talking to them. And so we spent years trying to find a company that could let us know, when did they actually talk to a human versus when did they talk to a machine. Eventually, we tested some vendors. We ended up building our own. And now what's fascinating to me is, instead of it saying we sent 100 calls, our call tracking will say we sent whatever 100 calls, only 40% ever made it to a human, and of the 40% that made it to a human, a third of them were leads, and then another third was vendors, and another third was what's the other category we have?
Well, missed. There's significant amount of missed calls.
So basically 60% of calls are missed. And then that allows us to start saying, okay, what time of day does someone actually answer the phone?
Yes.
And if we see that they're not answering the phone at noon on Monday, we have a heat map. Then we can say, great, let's not send leads at noon on Monday, meaning don't spend money on marketing at that time, turn it off, right? Now, I've always found that data fascinating to share with an operator to say, like, it looks like this is happening. Could we get coverage at noon on Monday?
Exactly. And to me, that is part of your smart building technology, your phone system. We can look at it from a very high level to say, what's our call volume? What's the quality of the calls? How many were dropped? How many were missed? And then really get down to the details, like you're talking about. Was this a call from a resident? Was it a call from outside, a potential resident? Where did it come from? Was it answered? What did it go to voicemail? Was it an emergency? For those residents that might be calling about a maintenance emergency or something like that. Once again, understanding then, how do we staff this building and with what kind of skill sets? What do you need to have there at what time?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people say over and over again, wow, it would be great if my property staff was there from 7 to 9 in the morning and from 5 to 9 in the evening, because that's when I need to interact with them. And I think taking a look at those call volumes on the day of the week, the time of the day, can really help companies understand, who should we have when? In some of our buildings, we may have a concierge who is there 24 hours a day. So we have a level of coverage 24 hours a day. In other buildings, that's not a need. That's not a requirement. So it's really understanding, how do we best staff to meet not only the resident demand, but also the potential resident demand.
What's that threshold on, like, when do you roll something out across all communities versus when do you test it maybe in pockets or go specialized per community? Because then at some point, that's a lot of different cohorts to manage.
It is a lot to manage, and I'm really fortunate at Elme. We have a senior director of strategic initiatives that I work very closely with, and we focus on piloting new technology and then making that determination. Did this live up to what we hoped it would? And evaluating that over a period of a few months, and then making the determination, hey, that worked, or hey, that didn't work, or this would be really good for communities that are having a certain challenge, versus, oh, this is good portfolio wide. Also, as you all know, different jurisdictions have different requirements depending on the technology. Some things you can't use in certain jurisdictions, other things you can. So we have to pay attention to that as well. So for us, it's really looking at, are we testing this in communities that are really going to give us the most knowledge as to how it works? That blend of the urban high-rise and the suburban garden, or the community that is heavily Gen Z versus, a community that is much more like Gen X and Boomer demographic. And really understanding, how is this technology working, for our different property types? That's why I say a smart building is different for every single company and for every single asset type.
Totally. It's just a common theme of really having to put yourself constantly in the resident's shoes, in the prospect shoes, see it through their lens.
Yes.
Meeting them where they are, and then understanding those insights that you're gleaning from that, and then when does it make sense to roll it out, portfolio wide, essentially?
I think so. I think, too, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the community team member, trying to absorb technology. How is it really making their life better as well? How's it helping them serve the resident and the potential resident better.
Totally. In one of the sessions this morning, they phrased it as give the community staff members a present, not a problem. Right?
I love
With
that.
technology, make their lives easier, gift it to them, don't create more work, and meet them where they're at and what they need. And to do that, you really have to understand what's happening on site.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why when we pilot, we go to those team members that have been doing the pilot and we ask them, look, talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Tell us what's happening so that we know, and your fellow community teams understand, like, what's it like working with this product. And honestly, I always go with the influencer model at work when we are trying to get like new technology rolled out. Have that person that is so passionate about it that if it was a skin cream, they'd be posting about it on Instagram.
Totally. It's amazing. It's powerful.
I love that idea of the influencer model. And Nicole went on a retreat just like 3 weeks ago or something.
Now, yeah.
And she came back and she ordered really fancy soap, and it was because she just loved the soap at this rental that you were in. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So if she came back and brought this soap to the office, it'd be like, hey, look, she's an influencer. I love this soap because sorry, it just struck me.
I like it.
Going back real quick to the testing, we haven't figured this out because we love to test new things too, but how have you set the right sample size? Like, have you set, like, when we test the technology, it must be on X amount of units or X amount of properties, or is it more of a case-by-case basis of like, let's test it at X amount of assets?
We are pretty strategic with that, and we work very closely with our vendor partners as well.
Okay.
To really look at what's an ideal number of units to test. You don't want it to be too big or too small. And where are those communities where I think, one, you want to have a digitally savvy community team, community manager especially. You want to have somebody that's open to change. I think that's really important when we're thinking about who's going to pilot. And you really want to be trying to solve a problem. For example, if you are looking at something you're testing for collections, you really want to try that at communities where they're having collections problems. So you can actually measure, did this improve or did it not? In a lot of cases, when we have a community where most people pay on time, we wouldn't test a collections product there. It wouldn't make any sense to do that. We don't have a problem it's trying to solve. But if we can show measurable improvement over a period of time at a community that might be having that problem, that is really the proof in the pudding for us.
Yeah, I dig it. It's tough because as we, when we had 100 properties, us testing some technology is very different when we have 2,000 properties.
Yes.
And so that's why it's very challenging to figure out what the right sample size is and how to reset. So we're big fans of Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great, Built to Last, and he talks about bullets and cannonballs. And we just constantly have discussions of like, what is the size of our current bullets that we're testing versus, a year ago. And so anyways, it's just remained an open conversation. I love to hear from people like you about how they're approaching it. That's what I was asking. I had one last thread I wanted to pull on, which was you talked a lot about ROI and like knowing that it was worth it. And when you said smart buildings, you said the Internet of Things, which can be a lot of things. Clap on, clap off to my microwave or something. So when there's a lot that people can choose from, but in your experience and in the conversations you've had with others, where do you find people should focus first on when they're making a building smart, if you will? Like what's like the low-hanging fruit, no-brainer, just don't overthink this one, you should do this?
I think there's really two areas. One is really the smart home, and that's smart door locks, smart lighting, smart thermostats, and on the cost-saving side, leak detection. Mm-hmm. Because for us, we not only look at an opportunity to make things better for the resident, but how do we stop a leak before it becomes a problem? And so leak detection is part of like our smart home technology package that we are incorporating into our communities. I think the smart locks, smart lighting, smart thermostats, I use the example a lot of, you all may remember when cars did not have airbags. And so really only luxury models had airbags. Or if you had an airbag, you had to pay extra for it. Like it was not common. Every car, no matter what price it is, has an airbag now. And I look at smart home technology in the same way, that for a long time, the communities that had the smart home kind of technology were the Class A, like the really high-end Class A. But I think it's expected. I think it's expected pretty much whatever kind of community you move into now. It's kind of like the airbag. Like, what do you mean they don't have a smart lock? What do you mean I can't have a smart thermostat? Like, what are you, like back in the 80s or something? And I think for me, that's almost become just a standard, like the airbag. I think the other thing is wireless capabilities across the entire community. And, we can really dig into that in two different ways. There is wireless activation of all of your inside and outside spaces, which is something we're really passionate about in my IT team. Everybody wants to be connected no matter where they are in the community. And it's really bad if they're out at the pool and they don't have connectivity. They want that. It's like if you go to do you ever go to a stadium or to an entertainment venue and you're like, man, the wireless here is terrible? You don't want that experience for your communities and for your residents. So I think that is important, but I also think making it really easy when you're moving into the community to immediately have internet capability when you move in and not having to sit at home and wait for any of the internet service providers, to come and install their equipment. And, oh, by the way, they didn't show up in their 8-hour window and all of those kinds of things. I think making that easy goes a long way to resident satisfaction as well. 100%. I think those are two things that I think every building, regardless, Class A, Class B, even Class C, needs to start focusing on how do we best provide this for our residents.
Yeah, it's interesting because the internet, telcos don't have a great reputation, right? Like most people don't like them, but it's not that I would completely shield the building from responsibility if it's bad, right? Because oftentimes if your internet connection is dropping, you could call your telco and they'll be like, it's not us, it's the property. And I was trying to decide if I'm allowed, if I should say this or not, but here at this hotel, the internet has been not good for our for doing the recording and stuff. And I was asking Trevor, I was like, Trevor, am I supposed to be blaming the hotel or do I blame the conference? Like, which one am I supposed to be blaming for the slow internet? Now, that was my first thought versus the telco, right? So to your point, like if you had bad wireless access in the building, maybe someone hates the telco and they're like, the damn telco, right? But other times they may be like, maybe it's the building before it gets to the telco. So I just love that you're thinking through the whole process because it's very easy to almost abdicate responsibility to say like, internet's not our problem, it's someone else's problem, but it will. I do believe it rubs off on the consumer and the way they're experiencing it, which then could have an impact on your reviews or your retention rate or any of that stuff.
Absolutely. I think, we all are developing certain expectations. And if we aren't meeting that where you live, then that's a big problem.
Yeah. Marcy talked about that this morning, Marcy Williams from RKW in her session with High Tech, High Touch. And how do you roll out these, very tech-heavy solutions while still providing great human experience and great customer experience in order to reduce friction? So to your example, the resident doesn't care whose fault it is with the Wi-Fi. They just need the Wi-Fi to work.
Yes.
And so how can we remove that friction from them so they're not even having to waste space thinking about solving these problems and it's just solved for them?
Yes. And that's what you want. You want them to go through life in your community with the least friction and aggravation possible.
Yeah. Well, that's great. What a great thread to end on. Susan, this has been really enlightening for me. As I said, call me naive for smart buildings, but I guess I'm more anxious for you to think like how much investment would need to go into buildings to make them good or whatever to keep them up to standard. So it's just not a job I would want, but I appreciate that people like you exist and are figuring it out because man, like I think about like I stayed when I was in Vegas last year and the smart shades weren't working. And I was just like, well, that was a cool idea, but they don't work. So then I was just ticked off. I'm like, I need to shield myself from the darn, Vegas sun. And so, yeah, not a problem I want to solve, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Oh, I forgot. Now we're going to do retcon.
Okay.
So we're going to do a quick retcon. They want 2 minutes or whatever.
Okay.
Have you been here before?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you can talk about your last experience and what brought you back and what you hope to get out of this one. So it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
They didn't give us a lot of instructions on this, so pretty easy. And I'll just do the same thing where I just say, we're here with Susan, introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about retcon.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, we're here with Susan from Elme Communities. Susan, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Susan Gerock. I'm the Chief Information Officer at Elme Communities. We're a publicly traded real estate investment trust based in Bethesda, Maryland, with communities in Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, about 9,400 units.
Great. And you've been to retcon before.
I have.
What did you think of the last one and what brought you back?
The last one was so exciting. I just loved the amount and the value that I got from all of the multifamily content that they had at the conference. I also thought they bring people from such a great mix of companies, public and private, and investors and vendors, all in one space. I would say that the perspectives that I got last year, as well as the people that I met in some of the more informal settings, really set me up for success last year and into this year. It was a no-brainer for me to come back. And this year, I brought my VP of Investor Relations. She's really very tech savvy, tech forward. And I'm introducing her to the conference as well because I raved about it when I went home. And she said, this sounds like something that I want to go to also.
Wow. You make me want to go. Strong recommendation.
Yeah, that's huge. No, I have had a similar experience. It's our first year here, so we have not done retcon before. But I love the different perspectives that I'm even getting just from the lunches and how it's bridging really the commercial, workspace, retail, multifamily side. We are solely multifamily, and so we go hard at the multifamily conferences, but really taking a step out of that, world, getting different perspectives has been super helpful.
That's fantastic. We're halfway through the first day, and I already feel that same level of being very energized like I did last year.
That's great. Well, thank you, Susan. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.